What's good, YouTube? Make sure you smash those likes, comments, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Got a lot to talk about today, so let's dive in. So, as we all know, on January 3rd, 2026, the United States attacked the sovereign nation of Venezuela in South America. And this is in addition to the Navy blockade that is surrounding Venezuela over its oil tankers, heavy sanctions, and threats of ground invasion, which hasn't happened yet, but one might think it may with the current leadership in the U.S. government. But the United States bombed Venezuela's capital, Caracas, and they illegally kidnapped the president of Venezuela and his wife, and had them boarded onto I believe it was a Navy ship, then flown to New York, where they would be held trial in federal court. So that's a little bit of the law. There's a lot to break down, but some people, from what I've been from my researching and understanding, a lot of people are upset about this because it can be considered, or it's being considered, an illegal act of aggression against a sovereign nation by the United States military. How do I want to say this? Yes, there are countries that do not recognize Maduro's as the legitimate president of Venezuela due to what they claim as fraudulent elections. But regardless, the United States is attempting to hold Maduro's, who's still a head of state of a foreign nation, trying to have him tried and arrested through U.S. domestic laws, treating him as if he was an American citizen that was breaking the law, which, first of all, he's not. So domestic laws should not apply to other nations. Now, okay, first, before I say this, I'm not an expert in law or international law, but I have a basic understanding of laws, kind of. So if I say something that is wrong, forgive me. I'm not a criminal justice lawyer or law expert at all, but as I was saying, he was held in. They had the trial for him in New York, where he and his wife pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. So now they're going to have to come back on March for another trial for some reason. But being January, a lot of things can develop or change between now and then, so we'll have to look and just stay up to date with that. But what's interesting is that the president, Donald J. Trump's entire reason for going after Venezuela, which no one even would, besides the few loyalists and trumpets that support everything Trump does, and some of the other Republicans in office, no one really bought his excuse of trying to fight narco-terrorism and drug dealing coming from Venezuela into the U.S., particularly considering the fact that there are more countries that are doing more damage with drug cartels and sending drugs into the U.S. illegally than Venezuela, who's not even really much of a big threat in the drug industry. And I've read some posts saying from some Democrats and Congress members saying that Venezuela isn't really a big threat when it comes to drug dealing and stuff like that. So it makes you a little suspicious on why the U.S. wanted to go back into Venezuela. And then you start doing digging and you realize Venezuela is home to the world's largest oil reserves. For context, the United States did have investments and assets in Venezuela prior to Venezuela nationalizing the oil fields and oil industry back in 1979, when it all became nationalized under one state instead of having foreign powers as well invest in it. Trump, which some of you may have not seen, claims that by doing that, they were stealing America's oil, stealing America's assets, and that they wanted to take it back. The problem with that is the U.S. has no jurisdiction in Venezuela. The U.S. also is not in charge of Venezuela. Venezuela is its own nation with its own sovereignty, and it has its own rights to its natural resources, same as the U.S. has its rights to its own natural resources. The U.S. has no claim to oil in Venezuela, despite what Trump is crying about again. And the United Nations has even made this statement saying that Venezuela has all the right and sovereignty over its natural resources, and foreign intervention will not change that. But Trump, for some reason, still believes he can control and run Venezuela and turn it into a 51st U.S. state. But as I was saying, the whole drug, narco-terrorism defense that Trump was claiming kind of flew out the window the moment he claimed that after the attack, the U.S. is going to run Venezuela. Not sure what that means, but considering the United States' past of running countries, I have a good idea of it, and it's not going to be good. It's going to be consequential, and it's going to destroy Venezuela even more. And then he mentioned nothing about drugs or narco terrorism at all. Afterwards, he mentioned how they're going to take back the oil fields and make Venezuela great again, and all this and that, and how he's going to take money from the ground and make Venezuela better. Lots of contradictions from what Trump was saying. Didn't mention drugs once, only mentioned how he's going to regime change. He's changing the regime so that they are in the U.S. favor. So there's a lot of things going on right now that can be considered dangerous for international law and the sovereignty of states. The U.S. went into Venezuela claiming they were doing it to fight drugs. And then they claimed after the attack that they did it to change the regime of the Venezuelan government to make it more pro-America. Reclaim their oil fields and profit from it. And they're going to run Venezuela. So right there is where people are having some problems, because legally, most people are saying that what the U.S. did in Venezuela was not legal at all. Not to mention Trump completely ignored and bypassed the Congress on declaring war. Didn't even go to Congress, just went straight over them and attacked Venezuela. Can't do that. Only Congress has the power and authority to declare war. And Trump kind of just cast them aside like they're not even relevant. So I also saw that the Congress this week is trying to get a War Powers Resolution Act passed to limit the amount of war powers the president has on waging war against sovereign nations without authorization from Congress. So that's some pretty big stuff. And let's not forget that Trump pardoned, the Colombian drug trafficker or drug cartel leader who did worse than this guy Maduro's did. I get it. I don't know everything about the Venezuelan politics, but I do know that a blockade of a nation is illegal under UN international law, and then attacking a sovereign nation without being attacked first is also considered a violation. What we see here is a simple truth. The U.S. continues to use militarism as a means to enforce its will on other nations. The U.S. continues to expand its colonialism projects and tries to continue harassment and bullying of other nations. And it's only going to get worse because countries don't want to fight against the United States, because every time you do, it just makes it worse, because the U.S. is stronger and can last longer than most countries right now, with some exceptions, but the U.S. is number one in military strength. Not to mention the United States has nuclear weapons and a president who's not afraid to attack people and countries at will. So that's scary to think about. We've also seen what happens when the U.S. gets involved in other countries like Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Cuba, and now Venezuela. They leave the country just worse than they did when they came in. The United States enters a country, invades it, and claims it's to defend democracy and freedom, but by the time the U.S. leaves, the U.S. has a tendency to plunder that country's resources, destroy its infrastructure, leave a humongous civilian death toll, and no accountability at all is taken by the United States. Another issue we have is that the United States is a member of the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member, which unfortunately means that there will probably not be accountability for the U.S. coming from this attack on Venezuela, because the U.S. has veto power, which it tends to wield all the time to avoid accountability for it or its other ally, Israel. So don't expect the U.S. to be held to account anytime soon. But yeah, the whole thing is just crazy to think that one country thinks it's so. The country is trying to enforce its domestic laws on other countries around it, and it can't do that because other countries are not part of the United States, so their domestic laws in the U.S. do not apply in other countries. And we've seen the U.S. Make more threats against Cuba, Mexico, Colombia, and it's only going to get worse because the U.S. is warmongering right now, and they feel that they have every right to warmonger, and it won't change until countries start taking a stand against it. I feel like the U.S. thinks it can get away with this because of a few things. A, it doesn't get resistance. 2, it's not receiving consequences, meaning it's not being hurt financially or with loss of life of American troops. So it thinks it can get away with this. The U.S. has no respect for other countries' sovereignty, international law, or civilians. And I think once countries start realizing that you can only fight power with power, that the U.S. might start getting the hint that it can't just keep going into other countries, violating their sovereignty, taking their leaders, and trying to hold them for charges that have nothing to do with anything, really. And it's just not going to work out. It's also interesting to mention that the U.S. is also now trying to threaten to annex and take the country of Greenland, which is interesting because Greenland is a Denmark property, which is a part of NATO, which also the United States is a part of NATO too. So it's interesting to think about that because the consequences, should that happen, will be enormous. NATO could possibly be dissolved if the United States attacks Greenland military, and it may lead to more conflict and weakening of the international law mechanisms and organizations. It's not looking good. Conflicts are rising at an all-time high pace. Nothing's getting done to end them or stop them from rising. So these are very dangerous times we're living in right now. But I think I've rambled on about that for a while. So I'll do another video again soon. So just want to talk about the Venezuela stuff right now, and I'll keep bringing updates on it when I can and stuff. But yeah, I figured with Venezuela being one of the hottest items in the news right now, I'd like to talk about it for a little bit. So I'll bring updates next time. That's what I wanted to talk about today. Let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. And if you want to see more of it, let me know too. Smash those likes, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all next time.